Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the importance of understanding the difference between being evidence-based and having actual practical experience and knowledge. Because there's a big difference between the two. Enormous difference between the two, particularly when it comes to strength training and fitness. And in a perfect world, you really need both. Okay, let's be realistic here. In a perfect world, you are up to speed on the wide variety of scientific literature and resistance training, strength training, exercise science, sports nutrition, all these things, right? You're at least up to speed with the current literature, what the various consensuses are. Okay, that's a minimum. And you have years of practical experience. Hopefully both with yourself and with coaching other people. Okay, the problem we have is that a lot of people don't realize that if you had to pick between one or the other, I'm going to be honest with you, the latter will get better results than the former, coaching and training people. Okay, and that's just a fact. That's a fact and an observation. And it's something I think a lot of the evidence-based people forget, because what you will see, and I've seen this in various circle jerks online, you'll get evidence-based people who clearly get so hung up in the nuances of trying to have some sort of academic debate with you when you're discussing practicality, that you can tell they've probably never coached an athlete in their life. And it's blaringly obvious. Right? It's blaringly obvious. One of the big ones I had got a discussion with another coach I know, and other people chimed in on his wall when he was discussing that the actual scientific literature shows that gaining X amount of muscle only changes your base metabolic rate X amount, and it's much lower than what people perceive. Okay, but that's arguing a point of nuance, isn't it? Do you know why? Because for purposes of your athlete or lifter's body weight, all we care about is their energy turnover, not their base metabolic rate. Right? It's completely irrelevant. In other words, if putting 20 pounds of muscle on a lifter changes their energy turnover by 1,000 calories a day, which it will, by the way, okay, an active athletic lifter who's not starving himself and dieting and reducing his NEAT, putting 20 pounds of muscle on them will probably change their maintenance calories by up to 1,000. For a whole host of reasons. And anyone who's worked with lifters and trained people and looked at their energy needs knows this. We know this. This is one reason you get people who say, oh yeah, a pound of muscle will probably burn an extra 50 pounds of calories a day. Well, the evidence people will come in and say, actually, it's closer to 3 calories or 5 calories based upon this study in the metabolic ward. Okay. Do you understand that making the latter statement makes you an ignoramus? And that you're creating a straw man argument to argue against, because you're basically, you have no experience, and therefore that's all you have to fall back on? You're basically just an idiot who reads studies. You're an idiot who reads studies who doesn't know shit about training, if that's the answer you give. Because no one cares whether it's coming off your base metabolic rate or your total energy turnover for purposes of your athletes or your clients' results. Okay? It's not particularly relevant. And what we're talking about, let's come back over to the point. You gain 10 pounds of muscle, you'll probably burn an extra 500 calories a day, give or take a bit. Probably so. Probably about right. The evidence-based moron with no practical experience hears this and says, but I looked at a study. I have a study that says it only increases your base metabolic rate by this amount. So you're wrong. And I would say to that person, please never, ever coach another person, because you're unqualified to do so. You're too stupid to coach other people. Or at least in the discipline of understanding how the body works, right? You just need to stay away from it and leave that to people with experience. If that's the answer you give, why? Because we said burn calories. Burn calories. We didn't say base metabolic rate. That's a straw man, and you're just too stupid to understand it, right? And you see that. A lot of the evidence-based people are seemingly intelligent in other aspects of their lives, but they're not capable of looking at the big picture and the synergy and the flow of things in a real person. They're only capable of looking at individual variables, which is great if you're doing your doctoral work, but it's not going to help you do crap with an actual lifter. It's not. I know people who are certified personal trainers with an undergrad in exercise science who still can't write basic training programming. They don't even understand how to program people or how training volume impacts recovery. They don't understand the ebb and flow of anything in the body. They can't get anybody jacked. They can't get anybody strong. They're not strong. Why? Because they learned a lot of theory and data. They have no clue how to apply it in the human body. And I mean, that calorie one's a perfect example, because I've seen it happen. I've had to have that argument. And I'm basically just like, I'm not arguing with you. You're too ignorant on the actual topic for me to discuss this with. Yes, there's NEAT involved. NEAT is an enormous factor, and that's not an exercise activity thermogenesis. That's an enormous factor in our energy turnover. But you need to understand that someone who's put on 10 pounds of muscle is dramatically more physically active, and they burn more calories with everything they do. They probably do move more if they've eaten a lot of calories to help build the muscle. Okay? There's a reason some of my lifters, my clients, have to eat over 3,500 calories to gain weight at all, who are under 200 pounds. I have those guys. Okay? I have those guys. That's what happens. We come back over to the point. You'll take some people who are evidence-based, and that's not good enough. And I'll be honest with you, you could take someone who doesn't read much of the science. They're not up to speed on the literature, but if they've coached hundreds of lifters and they're familiar with the methods of other coaches, they probably have more practical knowledge on how to get people jacked and strong. Right? They may not understand the mechanisms. They may not fully understand the mechanisms inside the body behind it, but they have a good idea. Right? And here's what a good coach does. A good coach gets the experience. They look at what all the best coaches in the world do, and they look at the literature and look for the points of commonality. But, I mean, a perfect example, exercise science is usually 30 years behind the strength and conditioning world. Right? The actual studies don't have the ability to even study the complex nuances of what we know works in strength athletes. The studies are so limited because we're dealing with individual variables that we have to test one at a time, that it becomes largely useless other than drawing a few useful pieces of information. I mean, we can look at different things and say, okay, this might be useful. I can apply this. And you get those tidbits here and there. You know, when we look at things like muscle fiber recruitment on versus bar speed, or again, stuff in untrained lifters is pretty much useless though. Like I'll tell you right now, if you're dealing with non-novices and you're reading tons of studies, which most of them are on untrained lifters about hypertrophy, you know you're not going to learn anything of value. You know those studies are actually almost completely useless. They're a waste of grant dollars. You know why? We already know how to make novices grow really fast. And people don't stay novices for long. What they're essentially arguing is that they're trying to find studies that might shave 2 weeks off the time it takes to get you through your noob gains. Okay? I want people to understand that. At best, the studies and literature that are out there might be, well, this person genetically on good training this way might have finished all their noob gains in 9 months, but if I find the right set of variables in this study, we can cut it down to 8 months or 8.5 months. Okay, there's very little practical application with that. I would argue that we don't need any of that. That's not useful. We already know how to get people their noob gains. We already know how to make them untrained, go from untrained to trained. This has been done hundreds of thousands, if not millions of times in the real world by coaches all over the world. We already know how to do this. We don't need studies on muscle growth in untrained people, or strength either. It's not complicated to get these people to trained. We don't have enough studies on trained lifters. Right? It's harder to set up and find enough people willing to do your bullshit who want to deviate from what they're already doing. But at the end of the day, what you're going to find, more frequently than not, real world experience will be worth 100 times more than being evidence-based. But the best coaches are up to speed with the literature. They have some understanding of it. They look at it, but have to assess, does it seem to work? Can this even be applied in the real world? How does this apply to my clients, to my athletes? Right? And maybe it's not applicable. The evidence-based person will argue that every study is so important that it's worth more than your experience. And notice the majority of them, with some exceptions, are tiny and weak, and so are their clients. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.